I was thrilled to be a Boy Scout, and then for months I was sexually abused by my Scoutmaster. And so this is happening very regular. So attorneys say they identified 150 alleged pedophiles never before publicly accused. And this is in the Boy Scouts. USA Today by James Kretschmer. So I may not be saying that name correctly, but this just in. Editor's note. On Monday, August 5th, lawyers filed a lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America. And so this was on behalf of a client alleging sexual abuse by his former Scoutmaster. So the lawyer also represents nearly 800 other clients alleging abuse. And so this is happening all too often and has happened. And it has gone back many years. And so the author of this column is one of those other nearly 800 clients. So this column was originally published June 10th of 2019. So I was 6 years old, and then I joined the Cub Scouts in 1969. So that's how far back this goes. So there's a sad story behind the Boy Scouts of America. So I adorned going to the Cub Scouts meetings. I felt important, and it was exciting learning new skills and learning the stories of how to be a better person. But the lessons were centered around patriotism, service, sportsmanship, and spirituality. And so, like most young boys, my favorite time was attending the campouts and being in nature. So we got to canoe, fish, shoot bows and arrows, and tie knots, and start campfires, and so many other things. I always strove to be the first one to earn a new badge or acknowledgement, and when I was finally grew up enough to become the Boy Scout, my sense of wonder and excitement for the organization only deepened. So I was learning how to be a better citizen and the best person that I could be, and the world felt limitless. So my father was stationed at Fairchild Air Force Base. And so we lived near Spokane, Washington. In the summer I was 12, I finally got a chance to go to a week-long Boy Scout camp. So at one point, the Scoutmaster presented a compass challenging game. Written on a piece of paper for each of us was a series of very specific instructions we needed to follow in order to find our treasure. So I wanted to be the best scout in the troop, so it was important for me to finish the challenge first. I studied the instructions and followed the compass to the perfection. And so it led me to the Scoutmaster's tent. And so we know what happens after that. It's not going to be a pretty story. So he smiled and nodded, and then he saw me arrive first, and there I was, the winner. His winner, the best Boy Scout around. Winning that game unfortunately changed my life forever. A child overtaken by an adult. So that night the sky was black and the stars sparkled, and I was sleeping soundly alone in my tent. But I awoke to a strange feeling of hot breath on my neck and someone moving his hands all over my body on the front of my pajamas. And although it was dark, I knew it was my Scoutmaster, and I recognized his voice in his breathing. I felt my throat tighten, and a wave of panic overtook my body, and I was still not knowing what to do. Do I call out and scream? Do I jump and run? Where to? Or to where? Maybe. I thought, if I lay still and close my eyes and cry, he will go away. I tensed up and became angry with myself for winning the earlier challenge. If I had come in second place, maybe he wouldn't be here right now. This is my fault. for wanting to come in first place so badly, and this was my punishment and I deserved it. Otherwise, why would it be happening to me? And so this is a picture of him here. All I could do was stay frozen and act as though as I was asleep, and then maybe he would stop and I could pretend like it never happened in the morning. Tomorrow I'll wake up and say to myself, this was just a bad dream, and then it would go away. But this is what it is like to be a child overtaken by an abusive adult. So unfortunately, this was just the start of the trauma, and I suffered at the hands of this scoutmaster. And so the abuse continued for more than 3 months. Finally, I told my parents what was happening during the scouting trips, and they listened, shifting in their seats. And at first, their eyes stared at me in disbelief, but then they fell to the floor as I described those nights of the scoutmaster in the tent. My father said it was time for me to quit scouting. My stepmother suggested that we should keep this information to ourselves and never speak of it again. They agreed that we would move on with our lives. And like that, the first night in the tent, I realized that we all just closed our eyes, looked away, and pretend like nothing had happened, and maybe it would go away. In the morning, we would call it a bad dream. Trust lost, trauma gained. So, but as I learned over the decades, this trauma never goes away, and children like me need counseling, and more important, society needs to go after pedophiles and the organizations harboring them to keep more children from being harmed. So as an adult, my relationships have suffered. I joined the Marine Corps and barely kept in contact with my family. And I called home maybe a couple of times, and I sent occasional letters, mostly around the holidays. I also married and divorced multiple times, and at that time, I told myself that it was because I was occupied with being a Marine, but I realized now that I was closing myself off and keeping other people away from me, especially the ones who wanted my love, and I had no love or trust to give. How could I learn to love somebody else when I didn't really love myself? And so about my 40th birthday, I really started to feel loneliness and despair that come from building walls around myself or around yourself. And so this is a sad story about a man who went through an abusive situation involving the Boy Scouts of America. And so it goes on to read that during his 40th birthday, he realized that he was feeling lonely and despair that comes from building walls around himself. So as crazy as it sounds, it never occurred to me that it wasn't my fault. This is what it feels like to be a child. And you look to blame yourself and protect the adults around you. And it took me many decades to come to terms with the fact that the man in the tent, the pedophile breathing on his neck, is the guilty one. Shame on him for hurting that little boy. This cannot be tolerated ever again, and I urge everyone who has been a victim, and this is coming from people who have been victims of the Boy Scouts of America, to become a survivor just as he has. Speak up and tell people what happened. The trauma he suffered at the hands of the Scoutmaster will always be with him for the rest of his life, but only by coming forward can reform be possible. And so that's pretty much the story. And so this person is trying to reach out to other victims because this is still going on, and it happened to him in 69, as far back as in 69. And so we've heard, I had a similar article that came out that spoke of a lot of the people that are in these groups, like the Boy Scouts of America, where it harbors pedophiles. And so this is a sad story, but I wanted to bring this out because it's coming out again, and people are now seeing what's going on, and it is causing a big stir. And so, what do you think about this story? Because this story is about a guy who is now, he's an adult, and he can't think of anything but to help others and reach out. And the way to reach out and the way to get help is to speak out on an issue and not to hold it in and pretend like it isn't happening. So with that being said, I'm going to let this video go, but this is a sad story. But the Boy Scouts of America has been harboring pedophiles, and it's time now for a lot of people to come out and say what has happened to them. Thanks for listening.